Okay, so I think we are live. So good evening to everybody. I would like to welcome you on the online artist talk organized by Kunsthall Bratislava in Slovakia. Online artist talk will be with Barbados visual artist Annalee Davis, and it is organized within the international exhibition Potential Agrarianism. Oh, it's so hard word. That is at the moment presented at the Kunsthall Bratislava in Slovakia, and it is organized by Slovak National Gallery, Kunsthall Bratislava, and Eastern Sugar project. Exhibition curators are Maya and Ruben Fox, and exhibition presents work of 13 international artists, and it lasts until the end of October. So if you are close to Bratislava or you are in the Bratislava, we are all welcome you to visit the exhibition. If someone of the organizers, curators, or artists are watching this online artist talk, I would like to say hello to all of you and to again congratulate to wonderful project that you bring, an exhibition that you bring in Bratislava to Kunsthall. It's a really great exhibition, and I think opens a lot of topics among artists and wider public. One of the main organizers of the exhibition is international and interdisciplinary contemporary visual art project Eastern Sugar, led by visual artist Ilona Nemet. And the main motive that is connected with our today guest artist Annalee Davis and Eastern Sugar is a sugar itself, sugar industry, and all stories behind the sugar. More about that, about the background from Annalee Davis, will tell Annalee. But first, I would like to welcome again Annalee and to tell that Annalee is visual artist, educator, and writer. She works at the intersection of biography and history, focusing on post-plantation economies by engaging with a particular landscape in Barbados. My name is Olja Trijaška-Stefanović. I am a visual artist and pedagogue at the Academy of Fine Arts and Design in Bratislava. I am not professional moderator, but I will do my best to talk with Annalee, and I'm very honored to have this opportunity to meet you, Annalee, and to have a talk with you. So this artist talk we will have divided into the two parts. First part will be online presentation and talk by Annalee, and the second part we will have a dialogue, me and Annalee, and there will be a space for your questions from audience. So please you are all welcome to send us the questions in the comments or in message to Kunsthall at the Facebook, and we will reply. Actually, Annalee will reply to your questions. So that is from my side at the beginning. Again, I would like to thank the organizer to bring this discussion. And now, Annalee, I will give you a word, and I'm looking forward for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Olja, and thank you very much to Ilona and to Maha and Ruben for including my work in this project. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of background. Jan, if you can move to the first slide and just establish a little bit of a context for where I'm working. My studio is located on this dairy farm. It's on the island called Barbados, which is in the southern Caribbean. It was first colonized by the British in the early 17th century, and it was referred to as Britain's first sugar island. It developed a lot of wealth for Britain, and this estate that you're looking at was originally operational as a sugar plantation from 1667. If you go to the next slide, please. My studio looks on to this old windmill, and the windmill technology was brought to Barbados by religious Jews who were fleeing persecution in Brazil. They came to Barbados in 1654. And so this is the remnant of a windmill. There used to be about 500 windmills on the island. And the building in the lower right front was the sugar works. So what you would have, how it would have worked is that the juice from the sugar would have been pressed in the windmill, and it would have gone into a gutter that would have run from the windmill into that building that's lost its roof. So this context that I'm working out of is one that has influenced my formation as a person. I was born and raised on a sugar plantation, and I'm interested in understanding how the plantation has developed, influenced the development of Barbados on many levels. Next, please. So the first image I'll speak about and the last image I'll speak about are two works that are currently on exhibition at the Kunsthall. And then in between those images, I'll share examples of some other works. This suite of photographs is called Sweeping the Fields. It's a body of eight photographs, and the idea behind the Sweeping the Fields work is it's a kind of a documentation of my body in the fields, moving through the fields with something called a cocoyer broom. And the broom is made from the inner rib of the coconut frond. So it's this kind of organic material. And the idea is this notion of moving through these former sugarcane fields and this kind of act of cleansing, the sweeping of the fields. It's very important that I'm not trying to sweep history under the carpet, but I'm trying to acknowledge a kind of a trauma in the landscape. And this is a kind of act of cleansing. Next, please. A number of years ago, I started observing the proliferation of these wild plants. The set of drawings called the Wild Plant Series are plants that I find when I'm walking in the fields. I walk a lot on the farm. The drawings are on old plantation ledger pages. And the ledger page is something that really speaks to the empire, the British Empire, the way in which they organized information and documented information. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that I'm collecting wild plants that were seen as unimportant plants. They were regarded as weeds, and they were taken out of the field either by hand or by chemicals. And what I'm suggesting in intervening these wild plants onto the ledger page is to suggest that these plants have value. They haven't been recognized as valuable plants, but they have value and they should be part of the narrative. The plantation ledger page shouldn't only give us information about the economics of the sugar industry. So I'm suggesting there are other narratives and images that are worth looking at. A lot of these plants have medicinal value, and I'll speak more about those in a future work. The next image, please. So the gentleman standing in the middle at the back of the photo, Dr. Matthew Riley, is an archaeologist who is working at CUNY University in New York. And we've been collaborating for a number of years on a project called Unearthing Voices. And we have done about 100 test pits on the farm where I live and work in an effort to understand the history of this plantation from the archaeological perspective. Here are students that come in every summer and they do a number of test pits. We've collected about just over 1,000 artifacts that are labeled and stored at the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. In part, when I started working with Matthew, I wanted to see whether we could find the location of the enslaved village. We haven't been able to do that, but we have found many material remains that give us more information about this site. So here are clay pieces that would have been made using clay found in the soil in Barbados. And that clay gutter that I spoke about that would have moved sugar from the windmill to the sugar works would very often have been made with the clay. And you can see a few other kind of brightly colored porcelain pieces in there. If we go to the next slide. So I started collecting these pieces that I would find on my walks. I walk a lot on the farm, and I decided that having understood the value of the wild plants that you saw in the earlier set of drawings and their value within the enslaved society as an apothecary or a medicine cabinet, these plants were used by the enslaved for healing, as a way to build community and as a way to understand this new landscape. So of course, Barbados brought in many people from the continent of Africa as part of the transatlantic slave trade, and they would have brought their knowledge with them and started to learn about this new land and how to work with these plants. So the Bush Tea Services piece, this is in the front of a pop-up exhibition curated by Cooking Sections in 2016. And I served the bush tea that I made with plants that I harvested from the field. And I would serve that to people who would come and have tea with me. But you can see in this image the pieces of porcelain that are intervened into the teacup and the teapot have openings, and so it's an imperfect tea service. And when I pour the tea, the liquid leaks out and it's very messy, and it kind of speaks to the gaps in history and the messiness of the history that we've inherited. Next, please. And these are some of the plants I used for that particular service of Bush Tea Services. On the left is the bay leaf, which is a very typical West Indian bay leaf, very typical cooling tea. On the right is something called Circe bush, which is a kind of a cleansing. It's very bitter in its taste, and it's used very often in Barbadian society. Next. And on the right is something called blue vervain, which is something that was used for wounds in bush baths, a practice that people in the enslaved society would have had bush teas, bush medicine, bush baths. And on the left are these small material remains that are made in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And these were made in the north of England in potteries, and they came across as ballast in ships. They were part of cheap crockery sets that were used by the settler colonial class and probably eventually by the indentured and the enslaved community. And when I walk, these are things that come up in the soil every day from several hundred years ago. So that kind of history that we have is very present. And so I kind of think about the soil as a tomb, the soil as witness to this history. Next, please. So after I did the Bush Tea Services, I then did this piece called Bush Tea Plots, a Decolonial Patch. It's a permanent installation at the University of the West Indies in Barbados. And it's inspired by Sylvia Wynter's writing about the plot. And the plot she speaks about as a small piece of land within the plantation. And if we can just hold on this image for a minute. So we have this glass vitrine that is showing a cross section of the island's limestone base, the soil, the shards that are in the soil, and then there are about 10 or 12 wild plants in here. There's a QR code on the side that takes you to a website that has a lot of research and information on these plants. But Sylvia Wynter speaks about the plot as a pre-capitalist site of community within the enslaved community, where they were able to be human and to share information with each other and to build community and to heal themselves. Next, please. Next image. I'm not sure if we can get to the next image, but the next image is this piece was commissioned by the Harlem Art Space in Derbyshire in the north of England. And the red brick building that you see was one of the earliest cotton mills in England. And I was commissioned to create another plot, but using plants for the mill workers. Barbados exported cotton in the mid-17th century, and these cotton mills were very unsafe places. If you see footage of workers there, it looks like snow is falling and they're ingesting the cotton, which gave them a lot of bronchopulmonary illnesses, including something called spinoschisis. So I worked with a guerrilla gardener and a garden designer and harvested plants that were growing in the wild in Derbyshire and created this bush tea plot that has you can see a bobbin, which is this kind of horizontal wooden shape on the right side that was used in the mill. And on the left are plants that were used for healing, for things like spinoschisis, for wounds, for bronchopulmonary illnesses. Next, please. Okay. I think maybe there's a delay. Okay, so the Parasite series was just shown in the Kunsthall in Vienna in an exhibition called "And If I Devoted My Life to One of Its Feathers." It was curated by Miguel Lopez. It's a series of 5 drawings. The top drawing, well, this is really inspired by a Cuban writer called Antonio Benitez Rojo. He's a Cuban essayist, and he spoke about Caribbean history is like a long annelid parasite running through the bowels of the region. And this has always struck me as a very interesting statement, because the parasite is something that feeds off the host. And I thought about the colonial project as a parasitic machinery. And so I did these drawings where my body is kind of looking at these parasites and, you know, beginning to understand the sort of parasitic nature of the colonial history and the colonial project in the Caribbean. And here, these are parasites that are in the soil. Here, there's this attempt standing on a mill wall, the attempt at expurgating or getting rid of the long annelid parasite of history from the bowels of the body. Next one, please. And this, yeah, this just gives you the, you know, the final image is where she's sort of standing in a pose to sort of confront this long annelid parasite, and her head and neck are 3-dimensional, and there's a sense that she's becoming, I guess, more dimensional and you know, a fuller kind of person in this stance that she's holding. The sea grape leaves are leaves that have the capacity to remove worms or parasites from the body. Next, please. This body of work, a series of drawings called "As If the Entanglements of Our Lives Did Not Matter." It's a series of drawings that were shown at the Royal Botanical Gardens in Edinburgh. Again, it's speaking about the parasitic nature of our history. In this case, it's really speaking about human relationships and how the colonial project affected how human beings interacted with one another, and even the realm of love is something, and intimacy is something that the colonial machinery impacted. If we go to the next image, please. So there are 2 portraits here. I'll speak a little bit about the one on the right. You just have a sense of the scale here. I think if we move to the next image, that one is in a detail. So if we hold on this image for a bit. So what I'm trying to do here is to create a family portrait of 3 people who were not allowed to live together. And in the colonial period, there was a strong emphasis on maintaining white supremacy. And so women's wombs, their reproductive organs, were very heavily policed by society. And white women weren't encouraged, or were very much discouraged from having relations with non-white people. So in this image, what I'm showing is the woman in the red dress, you know, coming from a poor indentured background, had a relationship with this biracial Barbadian man, and she was not allowed to marry him. And they had a child, and the child was given to her sister to be raised. And what I've done is I've put these people together to live together in a way that they weren't allowed to in their lives, and have put them with plants that have healing properties, some of which are to heal a broken heart, to heal wounds, to protect skin illnesses, because the child who was born was not pure and was not allowed into the house of her grandparents because she was seen as an impure child. They're kind of floating, so they're not solidly grounded in the society in which they live. And there's a parasite coming out of the base of her dress. The next image, please. And then these are supporting those portraits are a series of drawings of plants and the parasites and these roots on the plantation ledger pages. And these plants all have particular healing properties. Next image, please. And they were shown in the Royal Botanical Gardens with this vitrine in the front, where they had plants from their herbarium that kind of replicated some of the plants in the drawings on the walls. Next, please. One of the works that I've been engaging with recently is working at this site in Barbados. It's part of an area called the Scotland District. And it was a sugarcane plantation in the early 1700s. It converted to a silica sand quarry about 50 years ago. So you can see the dunes of sand here. And it's just been converted in the last 4 to 5 years, to a permaculture site and a site of regeneration. So I'm currently working with this place to produce a garden. So the sand is almost come to an end, and they won't be mining sand anymore. So the work I'm doing with Walker's Reserve is to produce a garden and a series of drawings. So these are drawings found of plants found in this area on the topographical kind of map of that site. If you go to the next image, you'll then see this is a plan. I'm collaborating with Kevin Talma of Talma Mill Studios, and we're designing a garden that will focus on women's reproductive and post-reproductive health. So I've done a lot of research to determine about 19 or 20 plants that have particular healing properties and a kind of a first aid kit. And this will become it's going to be a very small, intimate garden, about 10 by 7 meters. And this garden will become part of this kind of regenerative site. Next slide, please. And the final piece that I'll talk about is a Walker's Diary, an effort at disalienation. So this is the piece that's currently at the Kunsthall Bratislava. The topographical lines on the wall are the topographical lines of the site where I live. And the site where I live is called Walker's. So I'm kind of playing on that word. Walking is something that I do a lot of. I walk, 6 or 7 kilometers many days at dawn. And what I'm trying to do in this work is to sort of ask the question, how do we form in this moment of the Anthropocene and the Plantationocene, how do we form a different understanding of a landscape that has been so heavily mediated by history, by the plantation, and more recently by tourism? And so these drawings on pages that have come out, they're called daily analysis records, and they come from a lab in a sugar factory. And on the left in this particular image is a map of my walk. In this case, it's a walk that shows that I walked for 23 minutes and 5 seconds. I burned 52 calories. And then on the right is flowers from a flamboyant tree, which grows near to the windmill outside of my studio. So what I'm doing is sort of challenging the notion that there's this sort of subjective way of recording the space, and it's a very objective response to the landscape. In this image, this kind of collage vertical lines are taken from mahogany trees that are over my studio, and at the base are images of lace, and thinking about domesticity, women's work, the link between creativity and the natural world, the desire to make things beautiful, and how those things connect with each other. Next, please. And here are, I live and work under a grove of mahogany trees. So, you know, these are just things that I'm finding when I'm walking. They're very things that kind of, you know, stand out to me. The beauty of the mahogany pod, the alignment in this natural object, the sapling that is growing in harsh conditions, and there's again the topographical lines that are coming through, and the little building that is the house and the studio where I live and work. So they're very kind of intimate personal responses to the landscape that we haven't found in a lot of the kind of historical narratives around these spaces. Next, please. Again, making the connection between domesticity, women's labor, making things by hand, and the natural world around us. Here again is the map of a morning walk, and these are shards that I find in the soil. So creamware and different kinds of objects that I find, a feather, shells of snails, and sort of suggesting that one way of developing a more intimate relationship with the land is through walking. Next, please. And that's the final image. It's an aerial view of a field. All of the fields on plantations have names. Those names have been passed down for generations. And this is Big Orchard. And my body is a very small mark, kind of just off the path. And it's part of the landscape that I walk in many times a week, mostly at dawn, sometimes at dusk, as a way of just moving through this land and trying to think about how to respond to this differently than we have been taught. I think I'm at my time, and I should probably pause and hand back to Olya. Thank you, Jana, for doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Annalee, for your wonderful presentation. It was really great to hear the stories that are behind your works. Maybe I will to start to talk with you. You are presenting two works at the exhibition in Kunsthall, and this is your first talk for Slovak, well, internationally. Now we are online, so everybody can join us, of course, in this. But in our platform art community here, you are for first time our guest here in Slovakia. And so we have opportunity to see two of your works, Sweeping the Fields and the Walker's Diary that you are just now presented. So I will go back to this Sweeping the Fields. And when we are walking through the exhibition, we can take the brochure that was published for the exhibition. And there is a written that Barbados was the first Britain sugar island, actually, and that there was one of the wealthiest colony in the English Americas, and they perfected in its colonial machinery. Actually, in the 17th century, when the plantations were built. And what we see in your work is really your looking for identity, looking for a very close connection with the history of your family history, together with the history of plantation, of colonialism, of monoculture. And what I see, what is also connected with the sugar industry and sugar situation here, what Eastern Sugar and Ilona Nemeth are dealing in the project after '89, it's also this post-traumatic society and still present traumas. So my question for you is, when you realized that you want to deal and to open, deal with and to open this topic of trauma that were coming back to the slaves and to plantation and to all these other images that you showed through the drawings and a different projects.
When? I mean, I think that I've been dealing with the plantation and the land, for 3 decades, really. And I often think that artists are dealing with 1 or 2 ideas for most of their life, and they tend to refine that in some ways. So the landscape has been present in the work really since I was in graduate school. There has also been a lot of interest in trying to understand racial relationships, relationships between different races. Barbados is about 95% a Black country. The white population are a minority, and they come maybe less than 3%, and they would be comprised of the settler colonial class, indentured labor that would have come from Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and England. There would have been tradesmen and merchants, so a small community, but variety within that in terms of wealth and class. And more recently, there would be a small community, a small Muslim, a small Hindu community. There was the presence of Jewish people in Barbados from the 17th century. And even more recently, a small Chinese community, and there is also a small Syrian Lebanese community. So I've been interested in the landscape, and I've been interested in race and class and gender since I was in graduate school, really. And I think that some of these issues have become more poignant in recent years and have been very exaggerated as a result of the Black Lives Matter moment, that these discussions are happening. But I think because I was raised on a plantation, my father was a farmer. I now live on a dairy farm. It's not a sugarcane plantation, it's a dairy farm. But having been raised on a plantation, which I saw as a natural environment, and it wasn't until I was an adult and much older that I realized there was nothing natural about the plantation. It was this very ordered, because there was growing green things didn't mean that it was natural. It was a very formal exercise of introducing a monocrop, Saccharum officinarum, or the sugarcane plant, onto the entire island. So by the 3rd quarter of the 17th century, the entire island was basically a plantation with Anglican churches. And it's a very complex history. And I think, I'm currently talking to you from Rotterdam, Olja, and I'm realizing that many of us in different parts of the world have been robbed through our educational system of full understanding of our history. And I think that in making my work, I'm trying to understand that history and its continued impact on contemporary society. So I feel it's been underneath there since I've started making work.
Mm-hmm. And so I will just continue with one question. When you said that actually now it's more bigger emphasis in the recent years with the Black movement, Black Lives Matters, and also with maybe climate change, when we started to talk much more open. So my question is how this plantation history and the slave history and all racial problems are, for example, presented in the museums, because we see your work and we look your work in the different galleries around Europe. Some of the exhibitions, some of the works are, of course, in the Barbados. But how it's these history questions are presented to the younger generations in the museums?
So in Barbados, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of exhibition spaces for contemporary art. We do have an institution called the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. They have a number of galleries that are showing, the kind of the interior space of plantation houses. They're also showing, there is information about the kind of historical development of the island. There is a room that is focusing on our relationship with the continent of Africa. We do have a very good archives, like the Barbados Department of Archives is a place that has a lot of rich information, but there aren't a lot of opportunities for exhibiting contemporary work. So we find alternate ways to do that, using kind of, working in pop-up spaces to show work. And I think that a lot of ideas are now happening online, because that's something that young people are, and all of us are engaged with. So I think there's a lot of conversation through online platforms. Increasingly across Barbados and the Caribbean, there are artist-led initiatives, and that's where a lot of interesting conversations are happening. I have set up something called Fresh Milk, which is an artist-led initiative that's 10 years old. And we've been hosting residencies, almost 70 resident artists over the last 10 years, and programming. So I think that there are a lot of conversations happening that are generated by artists themselves. And there's a lot of writing that's happening. So I think kind of in the social space, many conversations are happening around these issues. For example, Barbados is about to become a republic next month, and we will no longer have the Queen of England as our head of state. And this has generated a lot of discussion. Or the removal of Admiral Nelson. We have a statue of Admiral Nelson in Barbados that has recently been removed from the plinth, and it's being put into the museum. And that happened through national debate. The statue wasn't thrown down. There was a national kind of debate around it, and the government oversaw in a very formal ceremony the taking down of this monument, putting it onto the back of a truck and moving it into storage. And now it will go into the museum once it's been repaired. And an entire narrative will be developed around the history of this monument from its commission to its decommissioning. So I feel we're having a lot of very important conversations now, which also include at the state level forming closer relationships with the West Coast of Africa, because that hasn't been a strong enough part of our trade and social and educational life. It's been very much looking north to England, to the United States, and to Canada. So these conversations are happening in many ways.
Mm-hmm. And how I found very interesting when you were presenting your first work, when you were telling how you were making the drawings about the plants, that they were not okay plants for this wider society, that they were not okay plants, so they were putting them out from the gardens, from the fields. And I also find that there are connections with looking for the identity and staying or keeping the strong frames of identity. How it's because for me personally, Barbados and all this history of as you have, it's so different than our history, and for us it's so interesting to hear your talk. And so how was it was the base your work in the questions of identity, or how to keep your identity even though it's not so welcome as other plants that they are welcome on one field?
Mm-hmm. So I think these plants, I think the knowledge around these plants is very much connected to the history of enslaved society. And these plants would have been used as part of Afro-syncretic spiritual practices. There's a word for that in Barbados. It's called obeah, O-B-E-A-H, and that practice was illegal. So these practices were covert. They kind of happen in an underground way. And I think also maybe sometimes there was maybe shame around that. that these practices, and then when, these plants were needed because medicine was not fully developed, obviously, in the 17 and 1800s, and people got ill and they had to take care of themselves. So there was a lot of knowledge that was being used and shared around the use of these plants. I think what we're seeing now is there's developing in Barbados. We've been independent since 1966. And it feels to me that there's a greater pride around understanding our relationship to Africa and that value, and that people are becoming more confident in speaking openly about their Afrosyncretic religious practices. And it's a way for them to reconnect to the land, but also to reconnect to their history and their relationship with Africa. So I think that that's a very important part of the puzzle in forming a national identity, that we are becoming more proud of in acknowledging this, and also doing research into the vital nature of these plants. I mean, it's like a living pharmacy. So yes, I think that's becoming more well known and more interest.
You are part of the Eastern Sugar Project, also in the book that was published just now, first in English language and now in Slovak language, and so you get into with the text and with the situation what is also related with the texts that are part of the book and part of the projects. And so what we are facing related to this topic that we were talking now, it's like monoculture that is happening for last 30 years with very different kind of growing, not plantation, but different economical situation that brought after the 89 and fall of Berlin War. And Eastern Sugar is a interdisciplinary project, as I said on the beginning. And your projects are very interdisciplinary. They are using the knowledge of history, researches in the archive, in the biology, in the apothecary, in all different fields. So with your experience as a long-term and well-known artist, how you are seeing art and interdisciplinary project nowadays in the contemporary art, how they can maybe bring more awareness of some social issues or political situation? What is their role today?
I mean, I feel as though, I'm very interested in collaboration, and I feel that the world we're living in right now we're living in a crisis. The issues are very urgent that we're facing in terms of climate crisis, issues around social justice, racial violence, economic inequities. And then I feel that the value of working in an interdisciplinary way means that we can work faster together. And so I find that to be very exciting. I mean, there are moments where I'd like to be on my own in the studio and to have a very kind of reflective kind of practice through, reading and writing. But there's something wonderful that happens in this crossover. So this image that's up right now at the moment, I've learned so much from Dr. Matthew Riley. And for his students, so 3 of these students here are from the Caribbean diaspora, and they, some of them had never been to the Caribbean, or, have an estranged relationship from the Caribbean. They're maybe 2nd or 3rd generation students, maybe they're the 1st generation going to university. And for them coming to Barbados and working on a former sugarcane plantation and being involved in these digs is a really important way for them to kind of have a relationship to their history and to understand the value of archaeology and its collaboration with art practice as a way to understand our spaces differently and maybe more completely. So I mean, in my own personal work, I'm finding that there are lots of opportunities for interdisciplinary conversations. And I think that is very rich and exciting, because it's not possible for me to be trained as an archaeologist and a historian and a chef and somebody that knows everything about literature. So I think that these kind of crossovers it's something that we're seeing a lot more of. And artists themselves are using many different tools, I don't know, welding or printmaking or casting. So I kind of feel that this is very rich, and it feels like we have access to many things that we can take advantage of, and it's very exciting and stimulating.
I will also recommend to our audience, we can see who is with us at this lecture, that is so tricky position of this online talks that we are talking to, we are making dialogue, but we can't see who is with us here. To also look at your website, it's really, really nice made it, and there are a lot of information behind your projects and what you are doing. And also I saw that information that you published recently a book. Mostly your projects are finished in a book form, or how you are seeing your results? If there are exhibitions, collaborative projects, or you always would like to have prepare the book based on your art research?
Well, the book that I had, it's called On Being Committed to a Small Place. It was edited by Miguel Lopez, who is a Peruvian curator. He was at the time a co-director of Teoretica in Costa Rica, and it was part of a longer series of publications honoring their 20-year anniversary. And so that was a compilation of 5 previously published essays and a new one that I was commissioned to write for the publication, and then a conversation between Miguel and myself. And this was a really wonderful opportunity to be able to reflect, and a real privilege and an honor to have that. I mean, I at the moment, I'm doing this work with the quarry that's converting. I'm also working right now with the National Trust of Scotland, and I have a 12 to 18 month project with them that's looking at the shared colonial history between the Highlands, so the northern part of Scotland, the relationship between the Highlands and Barbados, and the movement of indentured labor from Scotland to Barbados, and looking at the use of wild plants there. I'm going to be working with students in a school to develop a garden, and developing a series of prints. And we'll also be producing new work for the Sharjah Biennial in 2023. So kind of, working with ideas about this shared transatlantic history, being inspired a lot by the natural world and learning from that. But there is a grounding in the particular landscape from which I come. And it's been just really kind of enriching to see the kind of interest developing around the work, and the different kinds of invitations that have been coming out of that, like collaborating with Ilona on that discursive exchange that we have in her publication, and then the opportunity to be commissioned to do that new work. So it's very fertile, because, showing the work in Slovakia, and for me to begin to have a more intimate understanding of our shared history, and remembering that our sugar industry plummeted when Eastern Europe started to produce sugar, and showing my work in that context is, I think, a very rich opportunity, because we then don't see our history in an isolated way. We realize that these kind of plantations existed in many places, and you don't normally think about in Eastern Europe being colonized. In the Caribbean, this isn't something we've been taught about. So I think that these kind of transnational conversations are really useful, because it allows us to draw links around the world in these histories.
Yeah, I think, it's so wonderful that you are part of the Eastern Sugar collaborative research, and this transoceanal dialogue, because exactly these different perspectives are so important in this kind of interdisciplinary project, to see from different perspectives this colonialized Eastern Europe or history of plantation in Barbados. it's reading the book Eastern Sugar. It's really complex, and it's really one adventure to read, and hard adventure. It's not easy reading.
Yes.
Yeah. And so maybe I will just now see if we have still like 9 minutes before the end of our talk. So we have information that there are no questions, unfortunately. So maybe I will just ask you the last question. What was for you for us, as I said, I found personally so interesting to look at your project, to go deep in your stories and behind the stories, and to get to know the history. But what was, from your point of view, when you first met Ilona, and when you first met this idea about the Eastern Sugar? You just now mentioned a little bit, but maybe to see what was for you surprisingly some common fact or something that you never know before about this issue of sugar industry and the colonialism here, and growing up the sugar and economy behind the sugar industry.
Yeah, I had seen images in some of which are in Ilona's book of the inside of sugar factories, and they looked almost identical to some of the ones that we had in Barbados. So I looked at it and I wondered, how did she get that image? And then I realized it was a sugar factory in Slovakia, in Eastern Europe. And it just made me think about this pattern of capitalism and, the development of plantations, and the way in which these spaces in the Caribbean or in Eastern Europe can be used and treated in very similar kinds of ways. And so that was kind of interesting to really kind of understand more clearly that there were some commonalities there. And then the way in which they then just withdrew. So the shutting down of some of the sugar factories in Eastern Europe, and the way in which, the English then pulled out of the Caribbean, and, the economic fragility in some ways that we're still struggling with as a result of that. So I think that those kind of commonalities are there. I'm not sure whether or not there was a similarity in terms of our loss of biodiversity. So when the settler colonial class arrived, the biodiversity in Barbados was almost completely eradicated. And I'm not sure if that's something that also happened in Eastern Europe to make way for the plantation. But I guess, this kind of wild capitalism that Ilona spoke about after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the setting up of the sugar industry, that kind of wild capitalism is what really drove what they refer to as the sugar revolution in Barbados, the wider Caribbean. So it was really looking at the similar approach to, ways of generating capital, no matter what the impact was on the local, on the landscape, or on the people, or on the workers that were there, and having to deal with the fallout of that. I think in terms of, class and social spaces, not so much race, I imagine, in Eastern Europe. But yeah, definitely similarities around economic models and the whole practice of extractivism. So the plantation as an extractivist model to take and not really to give. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's a really good point where we can maybe also end our talk. And for more these similarities and dissimilarities, we can invite our public audience to come to see the exhibition, and also to check your website, and to read the book, to order the book Eastern Sugar, because it's really really unique. And it was really my pleasure to talk with you and to get you know. And I would like to also apologize for my pronunciation, but I'm I'm ill and it's starting to get a cough. So so I apologize to everybody if I didn't was so understandable. So it was great to talk to you. I wish you all the best, and I hope that you will have one opportunity in following months or years to come to visit us here in Slovakia and to meet in personally. So this was Annalee Davis, a visual artist and interdisciplinary artist from Barbados, who is a part of the exhibition in Kunsthall in Bratislava. We will just end.
Thank you so much, Olia. It's been a real privilege to meet you, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to show the work there. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to all who was with us during our talk. And I think it was recorded, so at the Kunsthall Bratislava, there will be at the archive this lecture, so maybe some potential people who would like to see and didn't have a time, so there will be opportunity to see. So we wish you all good, all best, and a nice evening, nice Friday evening, and enjoy Rotterdam and Scotland.
Thank you so much, and you have a good weekend.
So bye. Good night to you all. Good night. Bye. Bye. And thank you to Jana, of course, who was our support technical. So goodbye.
Thank you, Jana. Bye.